While we've been on the island for a couple chapters now, in this chapter, we finally get the chance to see the full scale of the Land of the Giants everywhere we turn. Plus, we get the opportunity to check in on the rest of our crew and an honorary Straw Hat in this chapter as well. So, let's explore Elbaph a bit in chapter 1130 of One Piece.
And before we get to Elbaph itself, we'll start with the cover series, where, despite Yamato's presence being enough to at least protect Tama and Shinobu from becoming the next kidnapping victims, the unknown villain that's been disrupting the land of Wano has taken something else of importance, that being Yasui's sword, and stole it right from Yamato's side as she slept.
So the very reason she was even set out on this pilgrimage has been taken, and I wouldn't be surprised if, with Shinobu and Tama's help, Yamato now has to confront this mystery villain or group, and she has to free kidnapped victims, recover the sword, finish her pilgrimage. There's no more time to just see familiar faces, eat some soba, take your time. I think Oda's kind of done making rounds. I think he's fully ready to get this cover series on its way, and I don't know about wrapped up soon, but definitely closer towards what it's actually about.
Yeah, moving towards some real action and not just her sitting around living her fun life. But on to the actual chapter itself. Starting with the title, we have the Accursed Prince. So after faking us out with Road, this title made it pretty obvious who we were about to meet in this chapter, while also foreshadowing a much darker backstory than we initially anticipated for the infamous Prince of Elbaph. But we'll get more into that as we break down the chapter itself, so let's get right into it.
And starting on page 1, where despite the best efforts of the Straw Hats and the new Giant Warrior Pirates, and even Jinbei's shark network, the same thing he used to communicate with all those sharks escaping from Impel Down, the search for the missing Sunny and their fellow crewmates has turned up no results, leading them to just call off the search and trust that their friends are going to find their way safely to Elbaph, like we've seen they already have.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be too surprising, the fate that they already have in the rest of their crew, considering it's pretty much just become like an honorary thing that they split up on every single island when they first reach it to begin with.
It happened on Elbaph, it happened on Egghead, it happens pretty much everywhere, so yeah, they should be pretty used to this happening by now, and honestly, it also felt good to see Frankie kind of step up in the absence of their usual captain and vice captain. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like Jinbei also made the decision, but I always love seeing Frankie step into that kind of role, kind of like what he did on Egghead as well.
Yeah, he's really been coming into his own in that regard. And also, let's just put a side note in, his outfit is sick as hell.
Oh, absolutely. Every time Frankie puts on a leather jacket, it just is beauty.
Yeah, you got the chains going, like, dude's cold.
The cowboy hat to go with it, it's pure Frankie. But on a more serious note, they also note they are out of food and drink. They need to get back to the island anyway.
Yeah, so they're definitely good with trusting in the other Straw Hats to figure it out themselves.
But going to page 2, we do see those other part of the crew with Luffy and his group who have now finally broken through their containment barrier outside of this castle, as we saw at the end of last chapter, and we get to share a bit in our captain's excitement as we finally get to see our first true glimpse of what the land of Elbaph holds for us.
Yeah, and go figure, it's giant, there's so much to take in all at once. You know, they see the trees, they're all enormous, must be thousands of years old. The mountains are almost too large to even tell if they're mountains or not. And the weather, well, the good news for Chopper, kind of rough for everyone else because it is a very harsh winter.
You can only imagine how cold an Elbaph Warlands winter is, but this is right before they notice that the individual castle that they're on is connected to a gigantic rope bridge just leading up into the silhouette of this giant tree limb, just giving us our very first glimpses of what Yggdrasil actually is instead of this block tree.
Yeah, and a good side note that I didn't even think about it first, but the cat that they were riding appears in the first panel when they escape the castle, but afterwards just kind of disappears without any real explanation. I'm sure that there's a reason behind it, but yeah, it's kind of like
probably just a paneling matter, but it is funny to see them like riding this giant steed, and then the next thing we see, it's just gone.
Yeah.
But seeing how large this land is, Nami notes that the land is so vast that it's dizzying to see the proportions of something so colossal. But they don't get much time to sit and just take this thought in, take this new world in, because they immediately spot two giants crossing the bridge and coming towards them.
Yeah, and in the moment, especially with what they just went through with this crazy dude, Road, I understand wanting to hide, but once we see who it is, I feel like they probably would have been fine, as we do see it's two other members of the new giant warrior pirates, being Goldberg, the cook, and Gerd, the doctor.
Yeah, they arguably would have been better off telling themselves to these people, because technically, as part of the Grand Fleet, these are their subordinates as part of Hajrudin's crew. But they have their own matters on their hands right now. They're going to approach Road, and Gerd makes it very clear she can't stand Road. And she even questions why he was even allowed to join Hajrudin's crew in the first place, to which Goldberg can only justify it by talking about how good of a navigator he truly is.
Yeah, and she goes on to say something pretty interesting, that despite Loki holding the title of the Shame of Elbaph, she personally seems to think Road deserves that name even more, which prompts a good laugh out of Goldberg that Rodo would probably enjoy that moniker.
Holding the worst possible title in the land to high esteem is truly a testament to Road's character. But as a fun bit of backstory too, before we move on from these characters, some fans might remember Gerd being the kind young giant in Big Mom's flashback at the Semla incident, who was just trying to include her. And Goldberg was also born right around the time of Road and Loki, so these two individuals were probably very familiar with not only the creep that we knew in Road, but the prince that we'll finally meet later on in Loki.
Yeah, and we then learn what brought them to the castle in the first place, as Gerd recounts that her pet owl Piper had spotted Road's crow carrying a small ship to the land, which Goldberg again just laughs at and says, you know, we're supposed to be catching intruders, but here's Road keeps sneaking in his own, all like on the side.
And apparently that's not the greatest crime you can commit in this land either, because he keeps doing it without much discretion, and having his own animal companions go after the ship and retrieve it. So luckily we had a good guy with their own companion on their side.
Yeah, and along the lines of their companions, just between his crow and Gerd's owl, I'm really interested to see just how much the Giants of Elbaph are actually able to communicate with the animals, especially because Gerd seemed to be able to speak with her owl, even though we just heard a hoot back. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, what level of companionship they have, and maybe even if it ties into the voice of all things.
That was one of the first indicators we had with Luffy, was like he could tame the bull, he could communicate with animals very well. So I wouldn't be surprised if they somehow had more connection to the voice of all things, considering, I mean, they worship the sun god, they have very ancient history, they're old people, so that could be a very logical explanation as to why that's the case. However, Gerd herself, on page 4, concludes this discourse by stating that she'll report this to Chief Ja Rule with whatever they may find. And for another reminder, as it's kind of a history lesson in this chapter review, but Ja Rule was one of the two chief elders during Big Mom's flashback as well, where Big Mom ended up killing Jorul. Ja Rule was the surviving one, who by current day standards would be 408 years old.
Very old. And having heard their conversation, Usopp rejoices at the confirmation that they finally reached the Land of Warriors and have that confirmed. And, well, again, we've been a little annoyed by Sanji and how horny he's been. Can't really blame him. Gerd is very, very beautiful, and he reacts as such.
Luckily, this one wasn't as crude or as disrespectful.
It was more just,
he's
look
just
how
taken
beautiful.
aback by her beauty.
Well, I'll let this one slide.
But Luffy doesn't care about what they're thinking about, what they're looking for, or what they're even saying. He immediately starts calling out to these people because they seem nice. And that's exactly how Luffy is. And of course, he's not incorrect with for his read of character.
Yeah, but understandably, Nami's a little more concerned about, hey, they said that they're looking for intruders. We're technically intruders. Covers his mouth, is like, hey, we don't want to be caught like this. We don't know who they are.
The Giants, however, look over, only confused for a moment to see Luffy's call was nothing more than just a very tiny squeak in their ear, like a little church mouse. And they just probably rightfully assume that it's just the wind like it normally is, and that they're imagining things before turning their attention right back to Road as they finally arrived at his front door to knock on the castle and hopefully get their navigator to stop doing creepy things.
Yeah, and I was a little thrown off by how quickly they were to just write it off, but, they're clearly focused on what they're here for, and the Straw Hats use that as an advantage to try to just get away, cross the bridge, and escape before any more giants happen to show up.
Although, it's not going to be easy. While this is a sturdy bridge for somebody like Gerd and Goldberg, this is not going to be an easy task for somebody of the Straw Hat size, because every one of those gaps between those planks is multiple feet, and you have to make a jump. So, while for somebody like Chopper, in his walk point, this is a breeze, because he's used to running on ropes when he would bring Kureha down from Drum Island's castle, and he even reminds Nami of that as she's riding on his back, but I got this. Like, I'm used to this stuff.
Like, between that and the weather, my guy's in his element right now. And then, on the flip side, you've got Usopp, who, he says that this is just a test, we've got to do this. He's trying to lean into the warrior spirit of the land, but you can also see he's terrified. He's holding on for dear life to those ropes.
And on the other side, Sanji, Zoro, they're just casually strolling across this.
They know they got this.
But Luffy, he's got his eyes on something else. He's clearly bothered by something. He's even standing on top of the ropes of the rope bridge. He's not on the slats at all. There's something more powerful calling to him, though. It's giving him this odd sensation, and it's not any of the wolves below them, as you can see them in the background of this panel just sitting there watching closely. So, I don't know why Usopp's on the edge if he's just looking down and seeing these wolves. There's gotta be so much worse.
It's just a test, I swear. But then, they ask him what's going on. He tells them, I feel something. And at least Sanji is aware enough that, they shouldn't go look right now. And Zoro, being who he is, starts to think, like, oh, well, I can go look. But thankfully, again, Sanji's on top of it. No, man, you are not allowed. The forest is off limits from here on.
Yeah, he gives him a dog rule. He's like, this is off limits. You can't go here. It's honestly a really good standing rule to have for Zoro.
Yeah, just keep that going for the rest of time.
But Luffy on his own can't shake this feeling, and he trusts in his crew enough that he's not too worried that they're going to get across the bridge. So he feels like he needs to address this more. He heard this all the way back in the Block Country. He talks about how it was some sort of roar to him back then. And just like the Rabid Guardians, the crew does not have long to react before he makes up his mind and has immediately jumped off the bridge towards all the wolves and everything else below them. So he's wasted no time. He's made up his mind. He's going after what's calling him.
Yeah, and I mean, at this point, they're not even, like, scared or concerned. It's just an inconvenience that they have to deal with. They've gotten used to it. But I also do appreciate the wide shot that we get that really demonstrates just how tiny these guys are standing on that bridge.
Yeah, it's I love the fact that this is going to be a whole arc of this.
Yeah, we're gonna get a lot of those just crazy perspectives of how dwarfed they are in comparison to their surroundings.
But before we can see any more of these giant perspectives, we do check in on the rest of our crew once more, who are still riding on the Great Eric, and the group has now attained a copy of the World Economic Journal, and the front headline that they're seeing is that the Straw Hats and the giant warrior pirates themselves are being stuck with the blame for Egghead's incident.
Yeah, and I mean, we can expect this at this point. They're never going to get the full truth through the newspaper. But it especially catches the Giants off guard that not only are they making an unexpected comeback, but Dory and Bragi, as the two captains, have had their bounties increased to a whopping 1.8 billion each.
That's a huge jump. Also, tiny side note, the fact that Broggy's like, I can't read it, it's too small.
Yeah,
it's just funny.
Yeah, good little detail of, this isn't a giant newspaper. This is for the normies.
But their crew reminds them on the next page, like, wow, from 100 million all the way up to 1.8, that's an insane jump. And however, Robin, always being the studious one, notes that it's not quite the same, as prices have changed a lot in the last 100 years due to inflation, which now canonically exists in the One Piece world. And I find it incredibly funny that I thought I would do the research and see what our inflation rate was for the last 100 years. And it turns out it's right around 18%. So there wouldn't be much adjustment at all if that's the real...
did math.
I did math.
No, but you're right. It actually does add up. So look at Oda just making it, again, very comparable to real life.
However, there's more to the story than just the numbers of their bounties. And they continue on talking about how they blame them for Vegapunk's murder, despite the fact that they literally fought tooth and nail to make sure that Lilith even had the chance to survive. Only one of them had the chance to survive, and it took all of that.
Yeah, and I mean, I like how Frankie, he was like, no, man, we fought for you, don't laugh at that, and Lilith's just sitting there, ha, you're really good, so you guys really did that, huh?
Yeah, you killed me. But they also, I love that they point out the fact that they're like, how did this photo get taken? Like, who was on that island taking photos of Luffy fighting gods? But whoever they are, they always get their scoop, and they're gonna pay well for whatever picture they got. Morgan's always gets his story.
Yeah, and speaking of that picture, I love, again, how on it Robin is throughout this entire thing, because she draws attention to the X that's drawn on Luffy's arm, and asks, initially, is this part of his freedom form? But then points out, like, this doesn't seem to fit. The rest of his arm in the picture is blurry, but the X is clear as day.
I think this is just a brilliant move by Oda.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, this is the perfect way.
Because we understand, like...
With also how the group is divided up right now.
No one there was with them in Alabasta.
No, the only person...
Would have technically been Robin, but she wasn't there for the X.
She doesn't know what it means.
She was hiding on the ship when it happened.
Yeah, she only might have seen it on her crewmate's arm.
And that was forever ago.
After Alabasta.
Years ago.
Yeah, over 2 years ago. So it's only vaguely familiar to her, like she says. But whatever the case, she just can't seem to put it together. And the moment any of the ones on the island see it, they're gonna know Vivi's with Morgan.
Absolutely. They need to make sure to, like, go over this, because they're all gonna know right away. Hold up, that's Vivi. But yeah, again, none of the people currently present are going to be able to put that together. And that's such a great way of her also sending them the message, hey, I'm okay.
Yeah, that's just such a brilliant stroke of that. I love that part. Moving focus, though, it seems the rest of the Giant Warrior Pirates are more impressed that Luffy is now being held on the same level of notoriety as Shanks. And they even laugh about how even one of their own rambunctious youngsters, Hajrudin, or whatever that rapscallion's name is, has fallen under Luffy's umbrella as well. I kind of think it's funny how casually they talk about, like, that little stinker, and they reveal that this is the prince of their island. Like, this is the eldest prince of their...
talking about him like, oh, just this one dude running around the ship. Oh, by the way, he's, like, the king's oldest son, right?
Yeah, very casually revealed the fact that Hajrudin is actually royalty now within Luffy's Grand Fleet before stating that Hajrudin and his new Giant Warrior Pirates actually wanted to go pick up the Straw Hats from Egghead as well, but Broggy and Dory claimed that they were the original Giant Warrior Pirates. We have seniority, so we're gonna go. You stay here on Elbaph and make sure that no trouble arises.
Yeah, and understandably, that kind of made them curious, the Straw Hats, of, like, what kind of trouble could bother a kingdom of giant warriors, which leads the unnamed giant who had warned the crew of the effects of the green fairy absinthe a few chapters back, to begin to explain the existence of another prince, born after Dory and Broggy had first went missing.
Yeah, this prince, in some translation it says he was deemed the Accursed Prince at birth. In other versions it seems like he might have earned that title later on, but regardless, they reveal the true meaning of this chapter. The Accursed Prince by the name of Loki, who in his years started devoting his efforts and his life to darkness and to all sorts of cruel powers and ultimate ability. And because of that, he was sentenced to crucifixion.
Yeah, it led to him attempting to flee, and it literally took the entire power of every giant on Elbaph to hold him back. And the crew listens on in shock as they learn that a legendary devil fruit had been passed down through the royal family, and Loki's desire to eat it was so great that he murdered his own father, King Harald, in order to be able to eat it and gain its power.
King Harald kind of seems like a fairly normal name in the One Piece world, but I think it does hold a little level of significance as well, because King Harald Fairhair is well known to have unified Norway in the early 12th century, so Oda's really laying heavy into tying in the historical references, the mythological references. I think he really has been looking forward to writing Elbaph.
Oh, absolutely. And they're going to definitely give us a lot of understanding to the lost history of the One Piece world. So it makes sense that there would be a lot of those tie-ins to the greater history just of our world that Oda is drawing off of.
It also makes sense with Loki killing his father to take that devil fruit that Hajrudin was very determined when he was in the Colosseum to get the Marimar no Mi. He had a birthright fruit stolen from him because of a jealous brother. So now, in order to become the rightful king of the giants, like he even claims he's going to become the king of the giants, it was in front of our faces.
Yeah, and I mean, it's something where you read it like, oh, he just wants power, like whatever. Oh, he learned afterwards that he can follow this guy. No, he had a very legitimate reason that he was there. Like, he was actually trying to be able to protect his people and probably go up against his now extremely overpowered younger brother and protect his homeland.
But before we can learn any bit more about that, we conclude this monologue transitioning back to Elbaph, stating that if Loki ever does escape this custody, it'll be the end of everything. And he repeats, he is the shame of Elbaph. This went from a very lighthearted conversation to some deep shit.
To very quickly like, yeah, this is not a joke. And honestly, man, Oda went crazy with this entire chapter. But let's also not ignore that we can never trust this man when it comes to character silhouettes. Because even on the page just before, the one we just turned, we saw the same goofy doughboy looking silhouette that we always have gotten for Loki, but holy shit, his design is so fucking cool.
It's epic. There's so many cool details. They should show his tongue out in the silhouette right before, but no, that did not do justice to this gargantuan figure that Luffy walks up to as he is just sitting covered in chains with a gigantic horned helmet, bandages covering his eyes, a belt buckle with a skull and a crown. He's got tattoos all over his arms. This man was so bad, they had to chain him with his axe on his back. They couldn't even take the weapon.
And yo, that's why it had to be snowing, because this motherfucker cold. Like, he looks awesome. And like, Luffy's fit is cool, but he is dwarfed compared to this dude. Like, he absolutely took the shine.
He immediately, with his tongue out with that Doflamingo-esque nature, says, state your name to this Luffy kid coming across his spot.
And we get his classic answer. Oh, I'm Luffy, the man who will be king of the pirates.
Yeah, but that word king holds a little bit more significance with this person, and we pull out a bit to see the same giant and Luffy from a distance. He says, king. But Luffy doesn't even care.
Where am I? Who are you? Like, he just wants to know what's going on. He needs the very simple details.
And he gives it to him straight up. On the final page, Loki gives his first major delivery as he screams, "This is Warland, the mighty kingdom of Elbaph. They say it's the birthplace of war." and then he gets crazy.
Yeah, man, for an outcast vilified by his people, first off, I just want to say, this dude is very proud of where he comes from. But holy, he goes so far. He calls himself, first off, the sun god. Let's not act like that hasn't become a normal thing for people to just declare themselves that. But he takes it so many steps further because he just so casually says, the man who will end the world.
Loki. Don't forget the name, but I will say, as insanely awesome as that introduction is, it's kind of hard to not look at the full scale of Elbaph and Yggdrasil that we finally get. This is a world tree. This is not some block tree. This is the island of nations of giants living inside it. And man, it's hard to not just go through all the tiny details hidden throughout this entire thing.
I actually just found one that I had not seen until this moment. Is if you zoom in right above the word Elbaph, you see what I would assume is either one of the group up on the bridge or one of the giants.
Yeah. You see
saying
Rhodes
it's
Castle.
shaking, but like you see, they're saying it's shaking again. That's how small the speech bubble itself is, dwarfed by how huge the land we are in is.
Yeah, it's massive. There are multiple dozens of waterfalls, hidden ecosystems likely all throughout these leaves. You can look on the second level. There's not only what looks like a castle and different encampments of cannons posted on the side of this island, but if you look just to the right of the trunk on the second level, there's also the rainbow just hiding in the background. Maybe that's the Bifrost Bridge, maybe not. How about the gigantic sword?
Huge sword. And you can see it coming from the top up here between the two things and then going down into the ground at the bottom. Like,
people loved measuring out that katana sitting in front of Onigashima that Kaido had, because that was massive.
That's nothing now.
This is so many times bigger than that. This is such a massive, massive tree with so much life hidden away inside it. And I am so excited for this arc every time we get a new chapter. This is just delivering on so many things that we've been waiting for.
Yeah, absolutely. Take those 2 weeks to really keep cooking it up, Oda. You earned it. This is crazy. We've really reached the land of the giants, the land of warriors. We're in Elbaph.
Yeah. Welcome to real Elbaph, everybody. Everything, person, animal, building, and legend is massive. And the anticipation for what might unfold on this island now that Luffy is face to face with their greatest shame is nothing less than giant. But what do you think we'll learn from Loki, and do you think he's truly evil? Because he sure is not doing much to give us any reason to think otherwise so far. Comment your thoughts in the comments below so we can talk about it, because this is such an awesome chapter. Like the video if you enjoyed the review, subscribe to join our One Piece family, and as always, be crew.